Welcome to Neutral Podcast, where we discuss paving the way to a regenerative tomorrow. I'm Nate Helbach, your host, founder, and CEO of Neutral, a regenerative real estate development company. Join us each week as we host world-renowned guests and explore the dynamic landscapes of real estate development, alternative investing, sustainability, forestry, urbanism, and design. Learning how to make places for people. Welcome back to today's episode of Neutral Podcast. I'm joined by Mick McConnell. Mick, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me. It's great.
Just to give Mick a little bit of an introduction and then get started. Mick is currently the head of space for Airbnb and is a true pioneer in creative leadership and branding. With over 25 years of experience transforming major brands through innovation and design, Mick has been driving force behind some of the recent and significant brand transformations of our company, Neutral, when we rebranded from the Neutral Project to Neutral. So thanks for doing that, Mick. He was also the CEO of Super Union North America, a WPP company. He led a team of over 150 professionals orchestrating groundbreaking creative strategies for Fortune 500 companies. Before Mick took the helm of head of space at Airbnb, Mick's journey reads like a masterclass in innovation, leadership, and branding, from serving as a partner and head of experience design at Lippincott to founding his creative consultancy and leading design and innovation at WeWork, to heading up creative and marketing at Samsung. His unique approach combines deep creative expertise with sharp business acumen, fostering environments where breakthrough ideas thrive through genuine collaboration, which we definitely saw in our rebrand with Neutral. So thanks for coming on the podcast today, Mick. I know we have a lot to talk about, so let's dive in. But maybe we could just get started with your origin story of where you came from and why you now have gray hair and glasses.
Thanks, Nate. Wow, that intro was incredible. I thank you so much for that. It's great. When you hear it read off like that, it does sound impressive, but when you're in it, it doesn't always feel like it's that impressive. But thank you for that. It's great. Origin story. It's a weird evolution to how I got to where I am, but it all relates. My father grew up in Los Angeles, and early work. My grandfather was the editor of a paper in Los Angeles. He grew up living in a mid-century modern house when it was new, not cool fad as it is today, in La Cañada, Flint Ridge, and went to school at USC, studied engineering, and worked for Caltech. And at Caltech, he did a lot of work with space telescopes, and worked on solar telescopes for Big Bear and a bunch of projects like that, which he loved, and kind of infused in our relationship growing up a love of all things space, which we'll get to later. The He then moved to Vermont when the Vietnam War broke out, because if you worked for a company that was helping the war effort, you didn't have to go, and he didn't want to actually go. So he moved to Vermont and worked for General Electric. So I was actually born in Vermont, even though my father grew up on the West Coast. So I had a lot of family on the West Coast, and it's always been something that I've been drawn to. So I grew up moving around a lot. He stayed with GE, got his master's in fluid dynamics, and he became a person at General Electric and I also think this led to how I got to where I am. He worked on a multitude of different projects. His role at GE was setting up factories for new components of General Electric, whatever they may be. So it could have been wind turbines for 5, 6 years in South Carolina to complete plastics facilities in Indiana or Pittsfield or wherever it ended up being. And so I grew up moving around a lot, and I grew up with a father that was always looking at new things. So he was involved in the early days, like at Sony, when they were building the new technology called the CD-ROM. My father worked with Sony on the technology for the plastic because of GE Plastics. to make the CD-ROMs. So that was a fun project for him. And then that led to another project because he got involved with tech companies, working with a young group at Apple on developing new enclosures for computer products that weren't beige. So he was involved with Steve Jobs and young Johnny Ive on early products like the eMate and the first colored iMac and projects like that. So throughout my whole childhood, I was just always learning about like problem solving. Like he was always coming home from work just talking about completely different things, like from a wind turbine efficiency to how you get a layer of metal sandwiched into a plastic that can read data, and that someday all data will fit on a CD, just this kind of. So I kind of always I always learned through him that like you could change completely what you were doing, which is I took that to heart, and maybe for the good and the bad. And I kind of just career-wise started thinking about my career as just a series of things that I was interested in. So I bounced around a lot. I ended up going to architecture school, not because I wanted to be an architect. My sister was in dental school, and I didn't know what I wanted to do, so I went and lived with her. And architecture was in the letter A's in the catalog, pre-internet. So the first degree in the catalog that I found that thought sounded interesting, I signed up for, and went to architecture school. I ended up loving architecture, and um, ended up getting my master's degree in architecture, and then graduating after doing a special program at SciArc in Los Angeles, where I wrote a book about school. So I wrote this book, not really about school, but it was called LAX, the Los Angeles Experiment. And what had happened was I was out in college at this experimental school in Los Angeles that was started by, Ray Kapp and Michael Rotondi and Tom Main of Morphosis and a bunch of great um, innovative architects. And we were all doing weird stuff at school, like rolling in motor oil and putting it on canvas and extrapolating out of this weird pattern a building. It was like silly, ridiculous stuff. And while we were doing this frivolous stuff, the riots broke out and Los Angeles burned, ironically, right? Like considering what's happening right now. So here we were, a bunch of like spoiled kids in college, and the city around us was on fire, and there were riots, and and we all felt silly. We all felt like this is pointless. Why are we doing this ridiculous work when there's real issues at hand? So I wrote a book about this change in what we all felt in school, and had the faculty that were also assigning us, these were adults, we were kids having fun in college, but these were adults assigning us these silly projects of rolling in motor oil. And they went through I would say, a dramatic change too professionally. So at the time, they were all young architects, but they've gone on to become pretty important names in architecture. But people like Michael Sorkin, Lebbeus Woods, and Hani Rashid, and Sanford Quinter, all these great theorists and designers. And so they all contributed to this kind of treatise around like the importance of architecture and urbanism and master planning and community building and and so here I was 20 years old, and had this kind of profound life change already, and didn't really like just pure architecture. Like I didn't really care about toilet details and roofing details. But I needed a job, so I finished my degree and I went to work for an architecture firm. And I found myself not interested in the kind of day-to-day operations of architecture, but more interested in just like big ideas and what we could do to change cities and change communities. So I was idealistic, as you are, I think, when you're young. And um, I did that for a while and just wasn't feeling fulfilled, and moved to New York City where I wanted to always be. Still working for an architecture firm. I work for Architectonica. I helped open their office for a brief period of time. It was just myself and Marissa Fort Brescia, which is Bernardo's daughter. She was in school at Columbia, and I think having an office there gave her a place to do her homework, and I could help her with her models and her drawings. So I think it was just a very expensive tutor. And um, so we were in Soho, in the Soho building, and across the street from us was Arnell Group. And Peter Arnell was a also trained in architecture, but he opened an ad agency. And he was doing lots of work for big brands, and he had a different approach to branding because he was trained as an architect. He really thought he was one of the early 360 guys. You know, like your brand is not just your word mark, but it's how you show up. It's how you appear physically, it's how your tone is, it's your voice, it's everything. And so we started out doing a lot of work for brands with a physical presence. So the Banana Republics and the Gaps and the DKNYs, places that had a retail component and early online component. Now, early online component, this is 1997, 1998. So like the first .com. So we were doing the first websites for Gap and the first websites for DKNY and so and so it was really fun to think holistically around uh, brands and what they were about, and I really enjoyed that. And in the process of doing digital work, again, old, gray hair and glasses, we we um, we built a digital agency, and so it was like one of the early digital agencies. It was called Surge Interactive. I got to join that with some friends that had started it for Peter and worked on some great early projects, including Guggenheim.com, which was their first foray into digital, where we digitized all their archives into an online museum. And that was spearheaded creatively by Hani Rashid, who I had done SciArc work, and he had contributed to the book. So we kind of rekindled our relationship doing that project, which led to work later. Um, and so I did all this digital work. We sold Surge to Draft, which was another big agency. It became Draft Digital. And a lot of us just left and went on to do other things, including two of the founders and myself went to RGA, which is at the time was the largest digital agency. And we started doing a lot more work where when I say 360, it was less about the retail component and more about like the presence of the brand in general. So we worked on Nike Fuel, which was the fuel band originally, that plastic thing you wore on your wrist and it calculated your running. And that later became like Fuel Points, and that later became part of Apple's health and the rings you see today. We worked on a lot of technology-based products that were physical products, but had a technology component to it. Um, and at RGA is where I really met a lot of people that I still work with today. Like it was kind of, I loved how you said masterclass, but that was really the masterclass was working for somebody like RGA. I met so many amazing people there that have gone on to become leaders at WPP, leaders at brands, and uh, really humbled by who I met and who I worked with. It was crazy. It was amazing. So after RGA, I actually started getting poached by brands, like leaving the agency side, and some of the brands that I had worked with started approaching me. Samsung was one of them. We did work for Samsung when I was at RGA. That's how I ended up at Samsung. And I started working from the brand side, and they were all brands that had a physical presence. And so, because back then, again, the age thing, there weren't like separate teams for like marketing, running physical and digital. You had to kind of pick a side. So I ended up working for like Starbucks on their physical environments team, even though they didn't have a digital team yet. So I was there when Brotman came on board and developed Starbucks.com, and we kind of collaborated on some great projects together. I went to Chipotle when they were just doing their transition um, with some great creative leadership there and helped them kind of rebrand Chipotle both physically and digitally and develop apps for them and the first watch app and everything. So it was a really fun time to be on the brand side. What's interesting about being client side, as a tangent real quick, is that when you're on the client side, everything's long tail, right? It's like you're really like in it for the long haul. So, you put together a plan of what you're going to work on next year, you submit it in October, the board approves it, the leadership approves it, and then you have like another year before you present how it's going. And And so having that freedom to really test ideas and work on things is really nice compared to the agency world where it's constantly pitching and doing the work really quick because you're hourly and getting out of there. So the creative juices are fed when you're on the agency side, but the fulfillment isn't because a lot of the ideas you work on just fall flat or dead or die on the vine, right?
Yeah.
But when you're client side, it's way more exciting sometimes because you get to really work on things. So I think that's also important to how I got to where I am today too. So I was doing all that work and I was talking about the approach to the work at different conferences when Hanny called me back and said, "Do you want to work for me on this Yas Hotel in Abu Dhabi?" So I went back to architecture briefly and ran the development of the Yas Hotel, which is in the middle of the racetrack for the Formula One track. So if you follow Formula One at all, this hotel sits in the middle and the cars run under it. And we had
What,
19,
sorry to
yeah.
make that. What track?
So the Yas, YAS. So Yas
Oh, nice.
Island
Yeah.
in Abu Dhabi. And so Formula One was moving to Abu Dhabi, and in the race was going to be in November of 2009, and we won the competition in November of 2007. And by the time we got like the team built up and everything, it was like January 8th. We we won the competition on November 21st of 2007. Dates are important to this project because it's ridiculous. By December 6th, we were piling. So we were in construction in 3 weeks, which is, we hadn't even drawn the building yet. We just had to make giant assumptions. We think the building's going to be this heavy. So let's build a raft slab that can hold a building that's this heavy. And we were wrong, by the way. When you see the building with this giant grid shell and everything, we had to like backpedal and add some reinforcement and stuff. It was crazy. But so we had 19 months to build this project, and this is it. This is the moment when my career changed drastically. So I was the project director of this project. We knew that we could not do it ourselves because we didn't have enough time. With 19 months, the reason we had 19 months, even though the race was 2 years away to the day, we had to be off-site so that the final months is when they build the track, and the track has to have less than an eighth of an inch difference in height across the span of the track because the cars are that sensitive to change. When they're going that fast, an eighth of an inch difference can cause the car to fly. So everybody has to be off site so that they can build the perfect track. So we have 19 months to build this building. It's ridiculous. And so we took a completely different approach to architecture. And I think part of it came from just working agency side and client side where things I did were different than traditional architecture. So instead of doing the work ourselves and having an ego and thinking we could do it ourselves, we actually just hired the best. So we went out and found the best people for everything. So the building itself had a component that was a bridge over the track. So we hired bridge designers. It was 3D curved. We didn't know how to do the 3D curve construction quick enough. So we called Anish Kapoor, who had done the Bean in Chicago, and said, "Who built that?" He told us about Central Stahl in Amsterdam, and we flew there and said, "Can you guys build this building in 16 weeks?" And they said, "Maybe." And we said, "Great, you have 8." And they ended up building this crazy 2-story, 60-meter long bridge enclosed that had a bar and a restaurant in 8 weeks and shipping it on a barge. I mean, the whole project was insane. We had 4 different bridge designers because they were pedestrian bridges and access bridges. We had, um, I think, 6 different structural engineering firms. It was a crazy project. And
And
so what
Mick,
I yeah.
who was the architect that you were working for at the time?
So Hani Rashid and his
Okay.
wife Lisa Ann Couture have a firm called Asymptote,
Yeah.
and Asymptote had done a lot of great small projects around the world, but nothing huge. This was like their biggest undertaking. So we went from an office of like 30 to 180 in like a flick of a switch. It was insane how big we grew. We were all living in Abu Dhabi, and it was the Wild West. This was 2007, early 2008, and so there was no like I think at one point we had like 25 apartments in my name because I was the only one that had like a bank account over there, and so I was just putting everything on credit cards, and it was insane. It was just an insane time. a lot of fun, a lot of learning took place. And so
What,
we
yeah, what happens at the end of the story? You
Yeah,
finish
so
one?
so the end of the story is cool because what happened was is we learned so much about how to build things quickly. Like and not be too precious with like, oh, I'm in charge. It wasn't that at all. It's like if Nate was the best at doing a restaurant design, then Nate, just do it. Just get it done. It has to be open. You kind of know what our vibe is. We're going to trust you. Do it. So we put a lot of faith and trust in people to get the work done, and we got it done, and it opened, and it was a huge success. And then I came back stateside 2009, and when you work on a project like that, it's an iconic building. It really is an amazing structure. There's this moment of like, I've done the best I could possibly do in this field. What's next? And so I I didn't want to do architecture anymore. So I kind of went back into, like agency slash brand work. I started doing my own stuff and um and I was talking about the speed at which we had done this project and how we had taken this idea of modularity and both in not just the construction methods, but also in the team structure, like bringing in whoever you needed to do per little part of the project to get it done and not being so precious with the team structure even. So modular teams doing modular work. It was a really different approach. And so I was talking about that at some conference in Napa, and Miguel McKelvey, the founder of WeWork, the other founder, Adam Newman and Miguel McKelvey founded WeWork. Miguel was there, also speaking about this new startup he had started called WeWork, and we kind of hit it off, and that was a weekend. I think by Thursday of the next week, I had resigned from Chipotle, and by Monday, I had started at WeWork. And
So
and
sorry, Mick, to
please,
interrupt. But
yeah,
what was the name of that building you worked on in Abu Dhabi? Just so I can put it in the show notes.
yeah, it's Yas Hotel.
Yas Hotel. Okay,
Yep,
just so people look at it. But
yeah,
then from a timeline standpoint, you got home from Yas Hotel in 2009.
yeah,
Then you went and worked for Chipotle for like a small stint, right?
yep, yep. Worked for Chipotle for 2.5 years, and then
And then
um,
now we're at the Napa story. So keep going.
yeah. And so then the Napa thing was interesting because we really hit it off, and I ended up going to work at WeWork when there was like 32 WeWorks globally. Um, and we immediately started doing kind of the approach that we had done on the Yas Hotel, where we were like, who's the best at doing each component. So like we really tactically looked at every WeWork and what the uses were and how we were doing them. And at the time, everything was kind of bespoke. And what I mean is there was some standardization happening, but it was just because like Nate liked that couch or because Miguel liked that light fixture. There wasn't a structure behind it. There wasn't a guidelines or a standards behind it. And so the first thing we did was write a really good guideline around WeWork and what it was and what a co-working space was. So we had to codify everything, name everything. We had to dimensionalize everything. Like this is what an 8-person conference room is. This is what a 16-person conference room is. We had to like name everything, scale everything, lock it in. We just locked it in. Then the day we turned it in, that we released the standards, um, Adam and and who I
Miguel.
reported to, this guy Federico Negro, had a meeting, and Miguel, and they basically said, "You, this is great. Thank you so much. Now, how can you do it better?" Like the day we turned it in, it was a little deflating, but I got it. I understood what they meant. Like, here you go. Here's my gift to you. Now fix it. So we started this project called CapEx-a-thon. Um, and CapEx-a-thon was done by this great little SWAT team that I had with some great architects and designers and tech guys that I still work with today on different projects. And CapEx-a-thon was where we really looked at architecture as a product and really like started to study like the impact of one little change here and the trickle down effect of like how can that change everything. So I always use the phone booth as the example. The phone booth was great because when we were building WeWorks at the time, phone booths were closets. And so when you built the closet, it was just a room, a small room within the building. So every closet had power, light switches, HVAC, gypsum, paint, carpet, furniture, you name it. It had a lot of different trades, sprinklers. So we said, well, if we're looking at savings, wouldn't it be a lot easier to build phone booths offsite? So we could build one wall with a bunch of plugs instead of every little niche and every little door and every little HVAC and build these things as objects, as furniture. So the phone booth kind of came out of this problem. So we had run the numbers of what it cost and how long it took to build phone booths as closets. And it roughly was about like 13,500 bucks a phone booth. And it took 8 weeks all in. If we built phone booths off-site, we could do it for 6,000 bucks and they were installed in a day. So this idea of like, could you shrink the time it takes to build a WeWork, which allows you to open the WeWork sooner, which allows you to have income sooner? So it isn't just the cost savings, it's the cost gains, right? Like, so when we did this CapEx-a-thon, by the end of it, we had figured out for them how to save $105 million over the next 80 WeWorks. And with that $105 million, we figured we could build an extra 30 WeWorks, right? So that kind of mindset of like ROI on steroids was game changing, I think, for WeWork. The team that worked on it really took on a new position there of like helping them do that for all their products. So we worked a lot with Fed and Miguel and Adam and this head of development, Dave Fano, to really approach each of the product lines. So the enterprise product, their small office product, in a way that isn't just about efficiency, but it's about like kind of global change. Um, Ironically, I was one of the first people to get affected by the Red Wedding. When WeWork started to implode after the Scott Galloway got a hold of the SEC filing and pick it apart. Um, I was one of the first ones to go because we didn't really need an innovation group if they were struggling. So I left WeWork and was just trying to figure out what was next. I kind of missed the fast pace of the agency world, and I was looking around at agencies. And some of my old friends at RGA were, like I mentioned, were now leading businesses, leading companies. And a couple of them were at WPP, at different parts of WPP. It's a giant holding company that owns everybody from Ogilvy to AKQA and all these great big agencies. Um, and they had this little brand agency, very small compared to Ogilvy, the big agencies. Super Union was 750 people doing $75 million a year, and they were having trouble with leadership because the leadership that they were putting in place in North America tended to be from a leadership background. Like traditional leader, like a McKinsey kind of leader, like you're not an efficient team. I'm going to get rid of you, or I need to look at my HR issues and get rid of people to adjust that. And so they took a chance on me because I had never been a CEO. It's not in my, it really isn't even to this day in my wheelhouse. But as a creative leader that thinks differently about projects, I think they wanted somebody to come in and think differently about the agency and how you run an agency. And so we kind of did a CapEx-a-thon, like how do you run an agency differently? And so this idea of taking like a large number of people and looking at what their output is and how they work and figuring out is there a different structure to an agency? I mean, very similar to like, I know it sounds crazy, but very similar to like a WeWork space, thinking about your team in that same way. Like, what if we what if we operate more as a series of freelancers and consultants and we pick the best of the best, the best render. You've seen the videos that I've done with Airbnb. That's ex Super Union freelancers, in Portugal, right? The best of the best. And having that network of the best allows you to go after some great clients. So we went from a small agency doing work for tier two, tier three clients to like winning big work. We did the rebranding for NASA of Artemis, the whole Artemis program, and we wrote their long-term strategy for the communication plan for going to the moon again and going to Mars. We did a lot of work for Coca-Cola, like 7 different major projects for Coca-Cola, Microsoft, Google. We were doing great work there. Great work. Um, and then in the wisdom of many, many holding companies where bigger is better, they merged us with another agency. And in the merging of that agency, they didn't need 2 CEOs. And so I exited WPP and had to figure out what was next. And I spent a good year and a half deciding that I wanted to do my own thing. And at the time, my wife, who also had worked at WeWork, um, she ran We Live. She had gone to work with some folks that had left WeWork when it imploded on a product called Neighbor, which I know one of your senior members there came from. And that's how I met you guys. I was building, hanging my own shingle after doing all these weird projects. And Daniel and Shamila worked together a lot, and she was always raving about Daniel. And then when Neighbor had some changes, I know Daniel ended up working with you on your product. And I remember getting pinged by Shamila saying you should talk to Daniel, and being super excited because I think once you're in architecture, even if you will leave it because you're turned off by it, you always want to go back, right? Like it's this grass is always greener. When I'm in the agency world, I want to be an architect, and when I'm an architect, I want to work on like brand projects. So when I started talking to you about like doing branding work for a development company doing amazing sustainable architecture, like that's like a dream client, to be honest. So anyway, I know that's a long-winded story, but that's kind of how I got to working with Neutral, and glad I did. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah. Yeah, it was great. Yeah, just to give the audience a little background, Mick came on board at the, I think it was end of 23, or late 23, and then
Yeah.
with us until he got this awesome position at Airbnb. But did a fantastic job of going through and really kind of helping both us define what the brand means, but also what the brand stands for. And I think early on when, I started and founded the firm back at the end of 2019, it was somewhat elusive, right? And it was somewhat of this like very
Right.
esoteric, high achieving, almost ivory tower type goal of like, hey, this is what we want to do. We want to go out and we want to change the world and build crazy structures that are fully carbon neutral and people love living in them and like all these crazy big statements that we were making. And then you get into the work and it's like you get this just huge kind of hit in the face of like, oh my goodness, we're never going to do any of this. None of this is going to be realized and I'm going to lose my job and go have to work for someone else. And thankfully that didn't happen. But it's like, I think what you did is you really helped come in and define for the public, someone just looking at us like, this is what we do, and this is what we stand for, and this is how we do it. And I think that's really instrumental when you're building a company because if people don't know what you do and they don't know what you stand for, they're never going to buy your product, right?
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
like people buy products to some extent from emotion and physical connection to the ethos of the brand.
Yep.
And I think having you define that for us was really instrumental because now moving forward into 24 and 25 and future years with the company, it's like we know what we stand for and we know how to really go out and communicate that because I think everyone internally knew exactly what the thesis
Yeah.
of the company is, right? We want to build great projects that are carbon neutral, that people love living in, and they have a focus on longevity and wellness. But no one really understood like how to communicate that with the public so that you can get the public and get partners to buy in. And I think that was really, really important. So thank you for being willing to do that.
I mean, it was such a fun project. I think you're giving me too much credit. You had, well, not just you, your whole team, but I think you had a good leadership vision for the whole project, and that made the job easy. I know you're selling yourself a little short by talking about like the idealistic vision, but if you don't have that, you can't really differentiate yourself. I think you guys have done a great job holding on to at least the goal, right? The high end kind of idealistic potential. But you're also smart enough to know that like that's a goal, and to get there I'm going to do everything I can. And so we had a I know what I really enjoyed working with you on that was the conversations of like we're still we're a real company and we're going to do real things to make headway, but we're not going to let that also stop us from doing great work. And so this idea of how do you t have a language around a brand that is striving to do better with each and every project is, I think, really important. I think that's actually why, in a way, indirectly, why we kept the name, right? Like, do you remember we had a lot of exercises where we were looking at a ton of different names? It would be fun to bring those back someday, and just talk about them. But yeah, we had a lot of different names, and neutral. I know it seems so obvious now in hindsight, but when we were talking about it, there was there was a little bit of a chicken and egg of like the brand mark of the neutral symbol and what it meant, as well as the word neutral coming out of I remember distinctly having a conversation with you and you saying that whenever you talk about neutral, you did what I just did. You would just say neutral. You never said the neutral project unless it was formal. And so you would always just answer the phone and yeah, I'm the head of neutral, and so it flowed off the tip of the tongue. But it also, by changing it from the neutral project to just neutral, it almost opened up the possibility of what it is and what it could be. And I really liked those conversations that we had. And so then I think we all, Daniel and you and I, we had that kind of aha moment of like, yeah, it just has to stay. It has to stay neutral. It can't be these other ideas that we were throwing out. And
Yeah,
so
I
then,
think
yeah.
that's I think a big point that I've seen over the years now of both employees that have come work for us, but also residents that live in our building and investors that invest with us, of like people like having this vision. Like they don't want the sorry to offend, but the 70-year-old developer with gray hair that has been doing the same thing for the last 5 decades or 4 decades, to just see that over and over again because it's like that is the old paradigm of how you build
Yeah.
buildings, how you design really nice living spaces. And I think having this kind of idealistic idea of neutral was like, I remember we were in this meeting in New York. I flew out to New York to see you for like a big workshop. And we were like going back and forth on all this stuff of like what neutral means, what are the like kind of core tone of voice and ethos of the brand. And
Mhm.
I remember us talking about like when a person wants to come lease from us, right, and live in one of our buildings, or maybe in the future we have a condo product and they want to buy one of our condos, like what do they want to think about when they're doing their purchase? Like what do we want them thinking about? And I think what we landed on is like we want them thinking that this building, which is true, is better for themselves, right, through our longevity and wellness programs and just through the natural design of the building, but it also helps in a way the planet. And I don't know if you read my LinkedIn post, but I was able to like over Christmas have a little bit more, even though we were closing this big deal, have a little bit of time to really just sit down and think more about like looking at all the brand work that we did. Like, what does neutral mean and why is it neutral? And I think the thing I landed on is something you had said in our workshop, and that is we want to be a company that regenerates through having our products, right, that we use natural materials, don't degenerate the whole ecosystem. We want to have people feel like they're living in a building that either is neutral, right? So it's neutral means that it doesn't impact the environment, or it helps regenerate. And it's like there's still some discussions around, okay, what does that actually mean? What does regeneration mean? But I think the easy thing is like neutrality just means that you don't affect the ecosystem. And I think everyone can buy into that. Like, even
Yeah.
if you're a hardcore like oil guy and you like all these like big trucks and crazy things, it's like
Yeah.
you still, when you drive into the forest, want that forest to be there in 50 years for your kids. And if you're
Right.
on the other side of the table, right, and you're like, I love trees and I'm gonna go hug a tree and I'm gonna put a peace symbol out there
Right.
and smoke a blunt under a tree, it's like you still want that idea of neutrality. So it's like somewhat ubiquitous in the sense that everyone can buy into the idea that let's just not have further impact. Like
Yeah.
anything from here, let's just keep neutral and let's create spaces that are really focused on this idea of like neutrality, wellness, longevity. So yeah, I think that it really helped formalize my thought of having you rebrand and have us keep the idea of neutral.
Yeah, the other thing that I think you're saying maybe in indirectly, but I think it's important to what you guys are doing is you're also putting an importance to design materiality that a lot of developers aren't doing. So it isn't just about creating a net zero or a neutral building. It's like a good building, right? A great building, a building people want to be in. I remember having a discussion about sustainability with Rolf Failbaum. He was the CEO of Vitra for many, many years. He and his brother ran it, I think, for 50 years, and then his niece, Nora Failbaum, took over. So she's the current CEO of Vitra Furniture. But I remember having a conversation with Rolf about furniture and like, some of the Vitra furniture, they make Eames chairs plastic, right? Plastic Eames chairs. And we were talking about sustainability and materials. And I'll never forget the comment he made. He was like, if you make something beautiful and well and perfect, people will not throw it away. Uh, I'm not against making a plastic chair because how many times have you seen an Eames chair in the dumpster? You've never seen an Eames chair in the dumpster. He's
Yeah.
like,
Okay.
people aren't throwing it away. And this idea of like, you guys are doing what you can with great architecture based on where we are right now with the current state of the economy, right? If it was a lot cheaper to do things perfect, you would. But the market doesn't drive that either. But you're doing amazing designs and amazing buildings that are sustainable from both an environmental standpoint, but also an economic standpoint, right? They work for people, to people to rent, people to buy. If you were to do the 100% idealistic building, it'd probably be too expensive for someone to be able to rent it. And so this idea of like you're doing the best that you can while making it real is kind of what Rolf Failbaum was hinting at about his furniture. I'm making great furniture, but I'm not afraid to take advantage of current technologies and current systems to do it. And if it changes, great, right? If we come out with a better material in the future that we can roll out Eames chairs with, they will do that. But for now, they're still plastic Eames chairs.
Yeah. No, exactly. And I think one thing that I was writing about over break was just this idea of like what does sustainability mean to us, right? Because I think
Yeah.
one thing that we even kind of got stuck in was like what is sustainability? What is regenerative development? Like if you go to the average person,
Yeah.
you're not an architect, you're not a developer, you don't know. Like you say these big words, but then what do they actually mean and what commitments are we making to
Yeah.
actually try to achieve them? And I think like what we see true sustainability meaning to us is achieving equilibrium when we consider natural resources, right? So like trees, forests, clean air, oceans, and having them renew at the same rate they grow, right? And that is the state of neutral. So, for example, you have a forest that's growing, and every year the forest overall is growing at a certain rate. So it's creating a certain amount of fiber, regardless of what you do with it.
That's right.
And so neutrality is looking at the amount of fiber that forest is growing and not depleting that forest by the amount greater than the growth. And
Right.
I think that when you frame it in that way, it's like, okay, well, this is an actionable, achievable KPI that we can look at and actually see if we're meeting. And I think a lot of these companies are just throwing around these words that don't mean anything. And I think that's something that with branding has been really instrumental of like, let's mean what we say
Yeah.
and let's take this iterative approach, like you've said, and really every single project we do get closer to our ideal state of neutrality. Um, Mick, switching topics a little bit,
Yeah.
Why did you land on the null symbol for a logo? I think that may be a big question, but I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Oh my God, I don't know if you remember the Illustrator file that I was playing with. We were looking at I don't know if you remember this, but I said aha moment when we were talking about the name. But when we were talking about the name, I don't know if you remember, but I had this crazy blanket of names and symbols and how we wrote them. And so I do remember at one point, I do remember at one point we were writing the word neutral, and I was playing with just to be referential for a minute, these friends of mine, Carlson Wilker, who I think are the best graphic designers in the world, um, had done a logo for another friend of mine. I had mentioned Federico at WeWork. When he left WeWork, he started a company that was a sustainable, it started as a sustainable kind of furniture supply company. It's morphed into a digital asset management kind of design tool. And when he did the design, when Carlson Wilker did the design for Kanoa, they did this book of design options, and one of the design options was if the letters, because it was about sustainability, and sustainability had a kind of a reference to economy, and this idea of like, could you do a word that for the economy of the word use as little change as possible? Like, what would happen if a C became uh, an A and became an N and became an N and an O and a so it was like one shape was the whole word. And this idea of like reusing a shape to make a word was one of the things that we played with the word neutral. So I do remember it didn't come to me originally as the null symbol. It came out of us playing with, I just explored what could you do the word neutral with one shape. I remember doing an N, an E, a U, the N and the U and all that. And we couldn't ever get it there. I remember I won't say that you were frustrated, but there was a level probably of dissatisfaction with the direction. But in the process of doing that, I remember the E at one point started to get rotated to play with that shape. And there was a moment there when the E got rotated that I saw it, right? I saw the null symbol in the E. And it completely changed the direction then, right? Like I suddenly said, it's not about the shapes of the letters, it's about that symbol. And that's when you and I started exploring like completely different directions with like the word mark versus the symbol. They don't have to necessarily. We did try it. I don't know if you remember. Do you remember we even tried like what if the E is the null symbol? I mean, I tried it with a bunch of different versions, and it's so funny to think about all the different things we tried. But in the end, we kept coming back to this idea of the null symbol being the important part because it itself is exactly what neutral is about, right? This idea of it being nothing, the idea of it's not about building something, it's about what you take away, what you don't do, what you don't waste, what you don't. So it's not like you're trying to build something crazy, it's what you're not trying to do. You're not trying to destroy the environment. You're trying to do less. I mean, I don't know if we can swear on this podcast, but it's like, how do you
Oh,
fuck up the planet
and
less, right?
it's exactly.
So, so this idea of like you're not trying for perfection, you're trying to do less damage, right? It's what's the least amount of harm we can do. And that idea changed the way we approach the brand and the word mark. So the null became this mathematical equation, right? In math, it's when there's nothing. And so this idea of trying as best as we can to get to nothing, as in no waste, no impact, right? Was something that I think we all kind of gravitated toward. I remember when we showed it to your team, we kind of had that stakeholder team that they were really I think almost everyone gravitated towards that right away. It wasn't like it wasn't like you were fighting for it and everyone else was like, "No, I like this one over here." I think everybody was like, "Yeah, that's it."
Yeah, no, they did. And I think that's the thing that, when you have good ideas that make sense. It's like everyone automatically, it's like gravity, right? They like
Yeah.
automatically gravitate. And
Yeah.
I think that when we were thinking about this, it was actually like, I think we had already landed on a logo and even like a font stylistic, and we were well down the way of writing like tone of voice
Yeah.
and guides and stuff like that. And I think we had all like already thought about this idea of like neutrality and environmental stewardship. And I think the null symbol, because it is a mathematical symbol and a physics symbol that means either empty set or no element or nothing, right? We all had this idea of like, that's what we want ultimately our buildings to do,
Right.
right? We want our buildings to have a zero environmental impact on our environment. And so it embodies in one symbol that idea and notion. So I think it was, I mean, props to you, Mick, for thinking about it because I would have never
I
thought
don't
about
want to take too long just reminiscing, but I remember one of the options was the word neutral with the horizontal bar of the E becoming a strike through of the word neutral. And I remember you guys hated it, right? Because it was this idea of like marking out the word neutral. And it came out of the null symbol. I remember thinking like, well, the null is kind of a zero with a line through it, meaning nothing. It doesn't mean zero, it means non-existent, right? And I remember exploring that, but immediately the team, not just you, the team was like, no, like that's taking it too far. And so it's funny
yeah,
how you can go too far, right? And then you pull it back. But I think it
yeah,
did prove to us that the neutral symbol should be the neutral logo. It makes sense, right?
for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, sure. Um, I think just switching gears because I want to make sure we have enough time for this. I'd love to hear more about what you're currently working on with Airbnb.
Yeah, I think the Airbnb thing is fun. I remember having to call you and say that I needed to slow down what I was working on with you guys because of Airbnb, and it was bittersweet because I loved all the work that we were doing. Um, but Airbnb called a friend of mine. I don't even know if I ever told you this full story. They called a very good friend of mine and said, "We have this role for director of workplace. Are you interested?" And he said, "Yes, but I can't do that job. You should call Mick." So they called me and it sounded amazing. Director of workplace. And it basically the job was managing the teams that manage all of their offices globally. And they had like 32 offices globally. Um, by the way, I've only been there 100 days. It's not like I'm an old salty sailor at Airbnb. It's literally still new. But in the process of talking to them about where they are with office space and where they're going with the brand, I have to be careful about too much of what I say, but it became clear that there was way more potential to this role than just managing office space. And so I realized that probably 80% of the way through the gauntlet that they put me through to get the job. You know, all the interviews and the key stakeholder meetings, and there were some group interviews. And and so I kind of tipped my hat or revealed my hand a little bit to Ian Roberts, who runs employee experience, that I think it's a bigger opportunity. And he said, tell me more. So I kind of hinted where I was going with it. And then he set up a meeting with Brian Chesky, the founder of Airbnb and CEO. And Brian and I met, and it was a great meeting. It was in San Francisco at their HQ, which is a great space. And we were sitting on the atrium and kind of in a public space. And Brian was kind of walking me through high level, like his vision for the company. But I knew that he was wanted to get right into asking me some questions. And he said, "So what are you going to do for us for our offices?" And I said, "Well, Brian, I know that there's a lot of change happening with the future of work. You know, you have a live and work anywhere policy. Because of that, offices are empty. You know, there's like in some markets, Nate, they had like 13 to 15% occupancy, like empty buildings. But even their busiest buildings were like 40% occupied. So there's a lot of opportunity there. So I said to Brian, specifically about Airbnb's offices, I said, wouldn't it be great if there was a way that people could list property on a platform for other people to take advantage of that property. And he smiled like you just did. He got it immediately. He knew I was kind of poking the bear with like, that's what Airbnb is, right? You people, I have an apartment downstairs. I put that on Airbnb and I collect rent for my Airbnb. Why can't I do that with office space? And as the company Airbnb, why can't we pilot this with our own office space? So that changed the job from director of workplace to this space role. Like we have space. What can we do with space? What are other spaces that we can take advantage of? What are other spaces we can offer our users of our platform? And I say users because it really is host and guest. And so we're having a lot of fun exploring what that could be. And in the short term, Ian likes to talk about now, near, far. So in the now, we have a lot of office space that are underutilized. So we're trying to figure out how do we better clean up that portfolio and figure out a different way for our own employees to benefit from a different scenario, whatever that different is. So in the short term, the now to near-ish, we're looking at ways to make our great offices better destinations for our employees that live and work anywhere, right? So they come to the office when they need to, and it's the right space for them for what they need it for. So we don't make people come to the office to sit and work on their laptops because people enjoy doing that at home now. They enjoy the freedom of doing it at the coffee shop. They enjoy the freedom of being able to do it at the swimming lessons for their kids while their kids are in the pool. They are working on work. And we don't want to take that away from Airbnbers. We just that's just not in our it's not who we are as a brand. I know there are a lot of brands out there that are forcing people to return to work. We're embracing the alternate, the other, and we really don't think that it's going to go back. Um, Now that people have had a taste of flexibility, that they don't want to go back. So we're really excited about that, what that means. I'm excited about also looking at like what are all the other things that we can do? What are all of the spaces that we can offer? So it's not just workplace. Um, if you think about like corporate offices of old, they had great cafeterias and cafes and libraries and workshops and material libraries, depending on what you did for a living. And so why can't we help people that are using our platform use other spaces that help them do what they need to do? And so I say it in a vague way like that because people that use our platform are using it not just for tourism and travel for fun. They're using it for work travel. They're using it for networking, you name it, it runs the gamut. Like I said, we have a Airbnb. We're super hosts, my wife and we have an Airbnb in our home here in Brooklyn. And the people that use our Airbnb, because we're in a market that's a 30-day stay or longer market, they tend to be almost 100% here for work. Well, it'd be great if we could offer them additional places, like if Airbnb could say, hey, you're staying in an Airbnb, why don't you use this workspace across the street? So we're really having a good time exploring what that can be. And in the short term, we're going to pilot some different things and try different things. And in the long term, it could lead to some, I think, great landmark projects. And I say landmark projects with the literal term landmark. I love the idea of we as a company could become stewards for great space and great architecture. Um, and in this new world of sustainability, what can we do as a platform to save great architecture as opposed to building new architecture? So we are looking at like how do we partner with other people that have space to give it new life and let the developers build the spaces that are needed, the new spaces that are needed. But the spaces that we could provide are the other, like the people that aren't sure what they need, the flexibility of space. I can do this call that I'm doing with you in a lot of different environments. This call, because we're recording it, needs some quiet. If you and I are chatting about just what you're working on tomorrow, it doesn't have to be as quiet. So that could be a cafe-like space. So we could provide different spaces for different uses. And and then I think one of the things I'm super excited about is are you and I have already chatted about this, but the other spaces, like wellness spaces, or what can we do to provide the things that our hosts might not be able to provide at the moment? I have an apartment downstairs, but what's my version to compete with a hotel? What's my version to be able to offer them a pool or a gym or a yoga studio? Like how do we offer these things, these spaces to our users that we currently don't offer? So that's really fun. We're exploring that now because I do think, look, that's what people need. I was going to say want, but it's what they need, right? They need other things than just a bed, right? Wellness is a big factor. And yeah, I'm excited about that.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting because I was telling you about this on the phone, but I was staying at this wonderful Airbnb in Vermont with my wife, and we needed some time away from the child and just to kind of rest and recharge. And so we went to Vermont for 5 days and kind of just pitched a tent, and not a literal tent, but a figurative tent in the woods, and just hung out at this like awesome small little Airbnb in the woods. It was like an A-frame type house, and it was really cool. And I was thinking more about it, and I was like, man, it would be sweet if we had access to a bunch of different things like you're talking about. Like if we had access to, something more akin to a spa and fitness center,
Mhm.
maybe longevity space, the ability to go and like get coffee somewhere and know it's a great cup of coffee and we can go sit and work,
Yeah,
a co-working space, like all these different things. And of course, it's like, I mean, how realistic is that in the woods of Vermont when you're 2 hours away from Portland, Maine, which is like, or you're actually more than 2 hours away from Portland, Maine.
yeah,
It was just thinking about it in more of the context of like, okay, if because we build space, right? And we
yeah,
are planning on having Airbnbs or something similar to Airbnbs be in our buildings, how could we have something where the Airbnb clients get to use some of our more specific longevity spaces, co-working spaces, cafe, fitness and wellness space, like all these different amenities that we
yeah,
offer to our residents and make it more of like this holistic experience where like you said, you have someone go to New York for 30 days for work.
yep,
And typically, like when someone goes, or at least when I travel to San Francisco or New York or other places for work, I sometimes don't find like a great gym to work out in. So I get super annoyed because I'm like, man, I'd love to get a good workout in, but it's like all I can
yeah,
do is go for a run. Or
yep,
sometimes I can't find a good space to work because it's like there's no kind of set up desk in the Airbnb and there's not a good kind of like quiet space, or I work really well in like a cafe setting and it's
yep,
like nothing there, so I have to go find a cafe, right? Which is like part of that is really fun, right? Because you get to see the vernacular of the city, you get to walk
yeah,
around. But at the same
yep,
time, when you're working, it's sometimes stressful because it's like, well, I need to go to a spot because I have a meeting at this time and I really need to jump on a Zoom call. So the way I've been thinking about it, at least for our residents, not from the Airbnb side, but more from the long term, I'm going to rent an apartment for 12 months, is I think people want a more holistic health, well-being, and living experience where
yeah,
everything is more inclusive. Because right now, if you think about it, like everything in our society is so disjointed that people really are not living very efficiently and very healthy because they're having to go to their home to live, they're having to go to a hospital when they're
yeah,
sick, they're having to go to a fitness center when they want to work out, and like all this stuff takes time and it's super inefficient. And it's like, well, why don't we just have it in one building? Like a lot of these services, at least for your daily necessities, right? Like
yeah,
you need to get, I don't know, treatment for cancer or your wife is pregnant, like of course you're going to the hospital. So not like major
yeah.
things, but smaller things.
But
Um,
truly like wellness, right? Like how
yeah,
to live a healthier lifestyle.
why can't you do that in the building? And so what we're deploying at Baker's, which is our first bigger kind of building in Madison, is we have a clinic with the doctor full-time on staff on first floor that anyone can use him for family practice medicine and as their primary physician. and they can go down there and get
That's
help,
cool.
they can
That's
get
great.
care, they can have stitches, all the things that you would kind of traditionally need or want to go to a pharmacy for. You just go downstairs. And then we have a fitness center on second floor where we have this massive facility with personal trainers. We have a small little spa treatment center where it has hot cold therapy. It has a cryo chamber, and you just book a room. You go in there for an hour, you do your thing, you go in
That's
the sauna, you
amazing.
go into the cold plunge, and then you get out. And then we have also on this kind of facility a full lab where the doctor actually, as a part of someone's lease, will be doing a full diagnostic. And so this summer, because we were kind of interviewing him and as part of the interview process, I'm like, I just want to go through your diagnostic and see like how healthy am I? And so I went through it and it was pretty cool because you go through and you sit down, they do the full blood panel tests. He asks you a bunch of questions. He like educates you about what the difference is between your overall years that you live and your healthy lifespan.
Yeah.
The difference is years you live is basically just counting mathematically, and your healthy lifespan is how long are you living with actual purpose? Like how long can you walk? How long can you do activities that you want to do? Can you pick up your grandkids when you're 80? All these different questions.
Yeah.
And then from there, he does all these tests. So he does an resting metabolic rate test, VO2 max test, a full DEXA scan, which tells you your like full body composition of fat to muscle. And then from there, he gives you a full protocol. And he's like, based on these tests, based on my interview with you, here's my recommendation. And so our tenants are getting that service for free as part of
That's
their lease.
amazing.
And
Crazy. Great.
and then they can opt in to having him be your personal physician, or if you want to hire one of our personal trainers to execute the protocol, or one of our nutritionists if you have a weight issue or you have a eating issue that you want to address. And so the idea here is like, and then we also have like the co-working space, the cafe space on site, like all these different spaces that truly, if someone wanted to live here for a week and they didn't want to leave, they wouldn't have to. Like we have partnered up with a farm called Vitruvian, and they're delivering on Thursdays and Saturdays, fresh fruits and vegetables to our farm room where you can pick up all your fresh meats, fruits, vegetables, greens.
That's so cool.
And I even have a little flower guy that is going to be delivering flowers as well. And so
That's
the
so
idea is
great.
like, let's bring people back to a community. Like, let's keep them there so they can actually have real life interactions because most people are like in the car, commuting to all these places, fighting with assistants to try to get like schedules in order.
Yeah.
Like, if everything was in one building, the amount of time that you just purely save from not traveling all over the place and driving and coordinating all these schedules, it's like, it's actually a lot. And then on top of that, having a really increase in service and actually focusing on the things that, in my opinion, matter. It's like, I think that people will be much more attractive to something of this, which I don't think we have it right now. Like, I think we have a lot to work on. But it's like, again, going back to what we were talking about earlier with neutral, it's this idea of like, what are we pursuing and what do we want tenants to experience? And it's cool to see that, like, it sounds like Airbnb is starting to think about that for their offices, but then maybe even for some of their living experiences with their rentals.
I first of all, I have to commend you. I did not know you guys were doing that much. That's amazing. It sounds like such an amazing, like I just want to live in one of those buildings now. You
You should
gotta
you should
you
move to Madison, Mick.
move to Madison or build one in Brooklyn. We should talk.
We
We
should
should
talk.
talk. There is a God, you said so much there that is really good. You know what I think is really interesting is we have this idea. It's not an idea. We do this. We have a team that works with developers on Airbnb friendly buildings. But Airbnb friendly buildings, and I don't mean this in a bad way. It's just we didn't know about things like neutral. Airbnb friendly buildings are just buildings that make it easy for people that are hosting or being a guest participating in the current platform as it is. So keys, right, getting access to the building, um, the idea of the app helping you get in, where are the keys kept, as opposed to hiding it under a mat or having a keypad on a door. Like what makes it easy for hosts to host and easy for guests to get in. So Airbnb friendly at the moment is pretty much transactional. And I think that makes sense for where we are. What you're talking about is like Airbnb friendly on steroids. Airbnb is a company that's about belonging, and this idea of if neutral buildings have flower shops and farm rooms, and I've never heard of a farm room. It's such a great idea. Like, and wellness and doctor and a gym and co-working, to your point about like that's Airbnb friendly. If someone comes to town temporarily and stays in a neutral building and they have access to all of these things, that's completely different than just access to getting in the building easier. It's like I now have access to all these amenities. The idea of every developer has an amenities list on their website, but the idea that the amenities are about community building is different than an amenity being like, um, I've got some Peloton machines in a closet, you know?
Yeah, I mean that's the thing that really bugs me. I think like the Airbnb friendly, I've actually I think looked at the Airbnb friendly list because we for Baker's Place want to do Airbnbs there. And I think like a lot of the things on that list is like, in my opinion, kind of table stakes, right? Like you
Yeah.
need to be able to access the door, right? Otherwise,
Yeah.
the person renting the Airbnb can't get in the door. You need to be able to have these certain things in your apartment because
Yeah.
otherwise they can't live in the Airbnb. And so I think it's like thinking about, and maybe this is something you're already working on, but thinking about like what is the next level
Yeah.
and maybe it's branded differently of like something different than Airbnb friendly. Maybe it's like Airbnb living, right? Where like someone who rents an Airbnb living
Yeah.
space knows that with their Airbnb comes these additional amenities that someone going to New York, for example, for 30 days would be able to say, hey, I want to live there because I know it's not just I have a bed to
Yeah.
sleep on, which is nice, and I have a shower to
Yeah.
use. I have a co-working space. I have access to healthy food. I have access to a great longevity and wellness space.
Yeah.
Maybe if you are there for 30 days, you even book an appointment with the doctor to get your initial protocol done to see like, hey, where's
Yeah.
my blood levels at? Like for me, I was eating too much red meat. So my thyroid was a little bit high. So now I'm like trying to cut down on red meat. And so it's like those are the things I think that people are attracted to
Yeah.
instead of, hey, I can access my door. Like in my
Yeah.
opinion, that's kind of just table stakes.
I love that. I love that you're thinking that way. I've got to get you in the door to meet with Brian. He would love to hear about this. It would be awesome. It's really great. I love what you guys are doing. Uh, this idea, when we had talked before about what you were doing, it was almost table stakes still. You've really expanded the product a lot since we've talked last. It's amazing. I love it.
Yeah, I think we didn't talk about all this stuff because I was working on it in the background, and some of it I was like, "Are we going to do? Are we not going to do?
Yeah.
Can we not afford it?" And I got to a place where I'm like, "We are trying to deliver a different product, and we
Yeah.
want to change the paradigm of living."
Mhm.
And so it's like we can't just say these words. Going back to just saying words, it's like
Yeah.
you say words and they mean nothing, and it's like the brand's going to die and the company's going to
Mhm.
die soon after that, or which in my opinion, death is like going back to the old way of development, back to the 70-year-old guy with gray hair building stick frame apartments with
Yeah.
crappy amenities, and like you said, a Peloton room and a 12 by 12 room. It's like I don't want to do that. That's death to me. Like
Yeah.
what we want to do is really change the paradigm and have a new way of living where people are like, I love living in a neutral building, and it truly changed the way I live. Like I'm healthier, I feel
Yeah.
better, I have more energy, like all these different things that come with what we're doing. That's truly what we want to do with people that are living in our facilities. And I think that if you're just going to say words, it's like just go and be a greedy old developer and go build stick frame apartments
There's
and
plenty of those guys. Yeah, there's plenty of those. It's more fun to chat with you about the potential for better, right? Like the potential for better living, better working, and the fact that you're a developer and you're talking this way is so refreshing because most developers are not talking like this. I will not name a name, but I had a meeting for breakfast 2 days ago with a developer, and uh, and they've got the formula down, right? And the formula is wrong. It's like they're just building um, Their residential are, it's literally just what you just said, table stakes. They're just building it out. And the co-working that they're doing in their spaces is also formulaic. They know that everything is four-person offices. That's the number one selling product. So they're just building four-person offices. So there are no shared spaces. There's no co-working like group spaces. There's no Dumbo house kind of vibe. It's just if you come to this building, they can rent you a four-person office. And they've got floor after floor after floor of apartments and four-person offices because they've productized it in such a banal way that it's all about just what is selling. It's not about like what makes for a better lifestyle. And I think that's the sad part about a lot of developers, right? Is it's just what is selling, not what is right.
Yeah. And I mean, don't get me wrong. I think like, of course, one of our focus is profit.
Sure.
Those four P's. It was people, place, planet, and profit. And it's like, of course, we're in business. You have to make
Yeah.
a profit. Like otherwise, we are going to be non-existent in 3 to 4
Yeah,
years.
of course.
And so it's like we're not against making profit. In fact, we want to make profit. It's
Yeah.
that I think while you make profit, it's focusing on the people actually living in the facilities instead of just focusing on, okay, well, I can get $32 per square foot for this room and I can get $30 per square foot for this room. It's like, well, what's the best room for
Yeah.
the person living there? And I think ultimately that's where actually the most profit will be made because it's like you'll have higher tenant retention, we'll have better reviews, we'll hopefully have higher occupancy than we're projecting, and over time it'll just become this brand that has true identity.
You know, the CapEx-a-thon idea that we did at WeWork, you should do almost your own version of that, like a sustain-a-thon or something where you look at like, in my mind, what I picture if I was a resident of a neutral building, that because of what you're doing there with the other spaces, you know, makes it where I would travel out less because I'm provided with spaces that I want to be in. So this idea of sustainability isn't just about like I'm using a different material on the roof. It's like, no, I'm encouraging people to leave less. And this idea of like if I just remove the amount of like excursions into the city by X percentage, how much sustainable impact is that? Right? Like there's a lot of other ways to measure impact than just what material I'm using. Right? Like I got this material from within a 2 hours of the building. Yes, that's great. But what if people don't leave my building? Right? There's less public transportation, less fuel, less whatever. I don't know. Like a lot of metrics. And the fact that you're thinking about like holistically, not just their apartments, but like all of the spaces being something that's serving them well. And I love the flower shop idea. That's serving people well, actually, right?
Yeah.
Enjoying your space is important.
Yeah, no, the whole idea of the farm room is every Saturday from April through October, I take my son to farmers market, which we have like I tell Daniel it's the world's best farmers market because they like fill up the whole Capitol Square with just tents and it's all local farmers. And so every Saturday I go down and pick out all of our fresh fruits and vegetables and there's this like great little flower guy that sells me flowers for $15 and it's like the best brownie points I get with my wife out of the whole year. So I was like one day just asked him, I was like, hey, would you consider bringing your flowers to our building and just selling them at the building? He's
Mhm.
like, oh, that would be great. Like I could have a lot more customers and I could bring fresh flowers to people and I think they would love it. And I was like, okay, phenomenal. Like, let's do that. And so now we just have in the farm room a wall that we have little pegs that flowers go in. And same thing with the CSA. It was like I get fresh fruits and vegetables from all these different farmers. And we partner up with a really great kind of like co-op called Vitruvian. And they're their own farmers, so they grow a bunch of stuff on site. But then they coordinate with a bunch of local farmers, and all their farmers are almost always within a 2 hour vicinity, sometimes a little bit further. But they bring all their fresh fruits and vegetables to Vitruvian, and then Vitruvian brings that down to our farm room, and then that gets delivered twice a week. And it's like great local fruits and vegetables, regenerative farming, all organic, along with meats. And it just is like people now have access to food
Yeah.
that's healthy. And I think a lot of Americans actually want to eat healthier. Like a
Oh
lot of
yeah.
Americans are not against eating healthy. It's that I think a lot of Americans don't want to spend the time to source all the local healthy food because it's like it's a lot of freaking work. It's like I go to farmers market every single Saturday and I spend an hour and a half picking out all my fruits and vegetables. It's like I don't think a lot of people like doing that. So it's like how do we make these really kind of healthy habits easy to access? And through doing it all in the building, it's like, well, you just live here and you have access to it.
You know, I know this call isn't about this, but I keep thinking about like the Airbnb part of that too. Like this idea of how do you explain to somebody that's going to come stay there that they have access to a farm room? Like I know at the moment it's not set up that way, but that would be really fun to explore. Like how do you let people know that have booked an Airbnb in your building 30, 60, 90 days from now, that if they put in their order, they can also have fresh fruits and vegetables and flowers. Like
Yeah.
90 days from now. Like, what do you think
Yeah.
it'll be? The raspberries, strawberries, and honey will be great, like whatever it is. And
We have a whole building app actually for the tenants that, and I know we're not going to be talking about it much longer, but we could maybe integrate and maybe look into that of integrating our app with Airbnb's app and figuring out how they could order all those things in advance. The other thing we're doing, which is really cool, Mick, is we are partnering up with local chefs that all use similar produce.
yeah,
And they're actually once a month going to be drafting 7 recipes. So basically, once a month, you get 7 recipes that correlate with the food you can buy at the farm room. And so it's like local chefs that are somewhat like kind of mini famous, and they will be writing these recipes out. And then you go buy your food that the chef is recommending from our farm room, and then you just make the recipe. And so it's like all through this idea of how do we just make healthy
yeah.
living really easily accessible. And I think that, we're learning, but we're on our way to getting there.
I love it. I love it. Well, it would be fun to explore how we can do stuff together. That would be a lot of fun.
Yeah, for sure. I know we're up on time, Mick, so thank you for coming on the show. Really
Oh, it's
appreciate
great. It's great. I don't know if we solved anything, but I learned a ton. Geez, I had no idea. I've been working with you for a year and didn't know that you had these grand visions. It's amazing. I love it. It's really good.
it. I actually learned a bunch too. I didn't know you worked on that awesome hotel in Abu Dhabi, so I'm gonna have to. I'll add to that and a few other things that we mentioned in the show notes so people can go check it out. It
If you
looks
watch,
while
it's
we were
really
talking,
great.
I
It's
was
really
like
great.
just looking at pictures on Google and it looks absolutely gorgeous. It's super cool.
If you
So
ever go to Abu Dhabi, or it actually, what's funny is if you fly to a lot of regions in Asia on Etihad Airways, Etihad is the one that's based in Abu Dhabi, and they have this thing like Icelandic Air does, where if you stop in Abu Dhabi, you can extend your trip by up to 2 nights, and they cover the hotel because they want people to experience Abu Dhabi. So if you ever find yourself traveling over to Sri Lanka or India or anything, and you stop in through Abu Dhabi, connect in Abu Dhabi, you can extend it. And so we did that just recently, my wife and I and my son, and we got to go to the track, and I showed my son the hotel that we worked on and all that. It was great. It was a
that's
lot of fun.
awesome. That's
Yeah.
cool. I
Thanks
remember.
for inviting me. Thanks for the crazy intro. I'm gonna have to go back to the recording and rewrite that down because I'm going to use that now on my LinkedIn. It's great. And I look forward to hearing more from you guys. It's really cool what you guys are up to.
Yeah, same here. Yeah, we'll be in touch soon, Mick. Thanks for joining.
Thank you so much. Bye.
At Neutral, we transcend the conventional notion of merely minimizing harm. We embrace a regenerative philosophy, seeking to create buildings that begin to contribute to the health of our planet. Each project we build gets us one step closer to this commitment, a living embodiment of practices that replenish and restore. We'd like to thank you for being part of this conversation. For more information, visit our website at neutral.us. Thanks again for tuning in, and we'll see you next time on the Neutral Podcast.